Well, tonight we're getting our first look at new video from a massive weekend raid near San Pedro and Bath.
Across Juarez, the head of state police in Chihuahua is blaming a drug gang for...
Have you ever imagined a criminal organization born in the hellish prisons of South America could infiltrate the very heart of the United States, controlling banks, police, and even schools? Today we uncover Operation Hawthorne, the historic raid involving 2,500 federal agents that seized tons of narcotics, $980 million in cash, and exposed a colossal corruption network led by one banker and his wife. Is the system you trust truly safe? Join us to discover the dark truth lurking beneath, and you won't believe what's about to be revealed. When I'm president, America's policy will be to dismantle criminal cartels the same way we destroyed ISIS and their caliphate. Listen up. One organization infiltrated our towns, our police, our institutions. But tonight we take back every inch of this country. Corrupt cops, crooked officials, more than 4 tons of narcotics, 2,500 federal agents, $980 million in cash, a criminal empire built by one banker, and this is where it finally comes crashing down. Federal agents have arrested 44-year-old Daniel K. Hawthorne, president of Georgia Prime Bank, accused of secretly bankrolling the violent La Furia Roa crime syndicate responsible for 8,600 crimes and narcotics trafficking across America. At 5:04 a.m., the quiet Georgia suburbs exploded with 2 coordinated FBI raids. Inside his $1.8 million mansion, they found 14 firearms, 7.22 pounds of narcotics hidden under the floorboards, and an encrypted drive directly tied to La Furia Roa. At the same moment, a second team stormed the 11th floor of the bank to dig deeper. Cameras went black, lights cut out. Inside the sealed room, Daniel stood with 3 Georgia cops beside duffel bags holding $62 million in cash, neatly sorted by color. The once celebrated finance leader had become the silent gatekeeper for America's most violent crime syndicate. As federal agents sifted through evidence from Hawthorne's home and office, one name kept surfacing: Claudia Varela, his 28-year-old wife. Soft-spoken and reserved on the outside, infinitely darker within, she was the daughter of the founding commander of La Furia Roa, the empire forged by escaped prisoners from Venezuela, Colombia, and Mexico, men brutalized by torture, hardened in border firefights, and shaped in bloody prison riots. For more than 8 years, La Furia Roa grew from a handful of escapees into a syndicate of over 2,000 members, linked to 8,600 violent narcotics incidents across 17 American states. Federal analysts described them as highly organized, mobile, and merciless of force, willing to ambush police, execute rivals in broad daylight, and hijack America's own infrastructure to move drugs across continents. Daniel did not stumble into this world by accident. He was guided in by his wife. At first, his role was quiet, discreetly laundering money through Georgia Prime Bank, manipulating accounts, and bearing financial irregularities. Greed swiftly turned Daniel from a passive financial conduit into the cartel's chief coordinator. In just 2 years, he greenlit secret wire transfers, took midnight cash drops, and masked dirty money as legitimate business investments. Worse revelations followed. Recovered messages proved he personally negotiated bribes with local officials and police. 23 county officials and 5 senior officers were bought, pocketing a combined $9.6 million disguised as consulting fees, facility upgrades, and community support. The raids exposed a criminal empire that had quietly metastasized across America, built on filthy cash and hidden influence. As analysts wrapped up last night's briefing, one conclusion was inescapable. La Furia Roa had evolved into a silent national web sprawling across America. At 4:27 a.m. on November 20th of 2025, federal orders dropped and the full takedown began. All units execute. Engines roared in 7 states. More than 2,500 federal agents from FBI, DEA, ICE, HSI, ATF, and the U.S. Marshal Service converged on 120 coordinated targets. This was one of the largest domestic cartel takedowns since the early 2000s. The first flashpoints ignited in rural North Georgia, where La Furia Roa ran a cluster of countryside safe houses. A tactical team and armored vehicles pushed through mist-covered fields under green night vision glow. The moment the front door blew, agents poured in and cleared the house. 3 gunmen charged from the back hallway with military-style rifles, but agents swiftly locked the place down, forcing the shooters back toward a staircase stacked with drug containers. In 90 seconds, the house was secured and 106 pounds of narcotics were seized. At the same moment in Houston, armored SUVs smashed into an industrial complex tied to the cartel's chemical conversion labs. As agents breached the warehouse, the air was thick with dust and fumes. Cartel workers hit emergency kill switches, plunging parts of the building into darkness, but overhead drones flipped to thermal imaging, and within minutes, 31 suspects were located and cuffed. Drums of precursor chemicals enough to cook hundreds of pounds of narcotics lined the walls like flammable tanks. Yet the fiercest clash erupted in Southern California, where La Furia Roa maintained its West Coast distribution hub. As federal teams closed in on the dock, a cartel convoy tried to flee in pickups loaded with hidden crates. A high-speed chase tore through the industrial zone headlights, strobing sirens screaming between concrete canyons. Spike strips shredded the lead truck's tires. The second rammed a federal SUV, triggering support teams that boxed the convoy from both sides. It took 14 minutes and 3 tactical interventions to neutralize the entire column. By midday, the scale was undeniable. 5,180 suspects, arrested multiple tons of narcotics, seized $980 million in cash, pulled from circulation $1.689 billion in cryptocurrency frozen, and hundreds of weapons recovered from AR rifles to modified handguns. What unfolded was not a raid. It was a military-style sweep designed to crush the core of a syndicate that had burrowed deep into American communities. But as the dust settled, agents realized the most dangerous part of the network still lay ahead, the part that wore uniforms, held public office, and signed the documents that kept the operation breathing. As federal teams worked through all 120 raid sites, a far more alarming shape emerged. Something far worse than warehouses, cash rooms, or cartel couriers. What agents uncovered in the next 24 hours did not describe a criminal network operating around America. It described a criminal network operating through America. Inside Hawthorne's encrypted drives, investigators uncovered 2.7 terabytes of internal communications, money laundering ledgers port, routing notes, and customs clearance schedules tied to specific public officials. What first looked like routine emails or logistics requests turned horrifying once matched to raid timelines. A Georgia County police sergeant who lectured high school kids on saying no to drugs appeared in message chains approving safe transit windows. A city procurement officer in Texas signed 18 emergency import waivers, each one matching shipments now confirmed to contain fentanyl precursors. A Florida medical examiner collected fees labeled clinical review, but the bank trail led straight to Claudia Varela's offshore accounts, and the list kept growing. The infiltration had gone far beyond street-level runners or crooked cops. It had surfaced inside the professions Americans trusted without question. A national trucking company driver quietly rerouted packages to cartel stash houses. A licensed physician wrote over 300 fake medical reports to keep members out of prison. Even a beloved New Jersey high school teacher known for charity work was caught recruiting broke kids into cartel training programs. Every file cracked another fracture in the wall of belief that American public life was still guarded by honest people. The real numbers left everyone speechless. More than 440 individuals in government healthcare, education, and transportation were directly or indirectly tied to Lafuria Roa's expansion. But the darkest discovery came in an internal spreadsheet titled Tier Support. It mapped 4 levels of compromised personnel: Tier 1 street-level enablers, Tier 2 city employees, Tier 3 law enforcement, Tier 4 financial and political influence. Daniel Hawthorne's name sat at the top of Tier 4 alongside 3 county officials and 1 still-sealed state-level advisor under federal protection. In a sealed briefing room, an FBI supervisor summed up the findings in a single sentence that chilled everyone present. This wasn't a cartel exploiting America. This was America's own machinery repurposed into cartel assets. That realization changed everything. The enemy wasn't just violent, the enemy was embedded. By the end of day 2, analysts finally assembled what they had dreaded for months: a complete operational map of Lafuria Roa's infiltration across the United States. It covered an entire federal situation room wall. Hundreds of pins, lines, timestamps, and coded financial routes stretched from the East Coast to the Pacific. What once looked like scattered crime now formed one single coherent outline of a hidden network woven straight into American life. The deepest shock wasn't the scale, it was the location. Lafuria Roa hadn't built its empire in abandoned warehouses or desert border towns. It had built it inside the places we live. Can you still trust your doctor, your child's teacher, or the delivery driver you wave to every morning? The cartel had rooted itself in the very places Americans trusted. Most hospitals, schools, local businesses, county offices, banks, churches. In Georgia, drug vans blended with the fleet delivering medicine to nursing homes. In Florida, tiny clinics churned out fake medical records to spring members from jail. In the Carolinas, narcotics rode inside produce shipments on highways right beside retirees' RVs. In Texas, cartel accountants nested inside legitimate finance firms, quietly turning millions in dirty cash into clean paper investments. The line between crime and everyday life had vanished. The deeper investigators dug, the more stunned they became. This wasn't a crime syndicate skulking on society's edges. It had wormed its way into the marrow. For Americans over 60 who lived through the Cold War, the crack epidemic, and endless political scandals, this shock felt different. No foreign enemy to point at, no distant battlefield to blame. The threat had grown inside the neighborhoods they'd called home for generations. In New Jersey, 2 drivers who delivered meals to senior centers were arrested. In Tennessee, a beloved substitute teacher now indicted once taught the grandkids of families who never missed a PTA meeting. In Arizona, the church treasurer laundered cartel donations through the youth ministry itself. Each revelation shattered another piece of the social trust older Americans had spent lifetimes believing in. Even more alarming was the cartel's mastery of digital money, letting the empire grow beyond the physical world. Analysts confirmed Lafuria Roa had moved $1.689 billion in digital assets, shifting funds with speed and invisibility no traditional syndicate had ever achieved. Digital pipelines crossed state lines faster than any truck, instant, borderless, and far harder to trace. The operations map drove home one undeniable truth: Lafuria Roa was no longer just a drug cartel. It was evolving into a parallel system feeding on the very habits Americans depended on. Healthcare, transportation, banking, education, every pillar the cartel hijacked to stay invisible. And at the center of that web, the quiet architect stood the former head of Georgia Prime Bank, Daniel K. Hawthorne. His decisions had let a syndicate born in foreign prisons graft itself onto the daily pulse of the United States. What federal teams now faced was no longer hunting criminals. It was dismantling an invisible infrastructure that had spread too far too silently for comfort. As the dust of the raid settled, agencies turned to the final and most painful front of the investigation, the individuals inside America's own institutions who had kept La Furia Roa alive. The takedown of Daniel K. Hawthorne suddenly opened a second front inside the heart of America's own government. This time, the enemy didn't carry guns. They wore the uniforms of trust. In just 72 hours, the FBI and federal anti-corruption task forces launched the largest internal purge in 40 years. More than 380 law enforcement officers across 11 states were targeted. 187 patrolman deputies and corrections officers were suspended on the spot. Over 120 officials, from procurement clerks to county supervisors, were served sealed indictments. The discoveries were so shocking that even veteran investigators stood stunned. An Alabama sheriff's lieutenant erased 27 arrest warrants, all tied to cartel couriers. A South Carolina state trooper routinely fed real-time GPS locations of DUI checkpoints so drug convoys could reroute on the fly. A highly decorated Georgia police captain nearing retirement had been selling armed escort passes to cartel trucks for $8,000 a night for nearly 3 years. But the heaviest blows came from sealed officer interviews. Some confessed out of fear La Furia Roa's legendary retaliation. Others admitted raw greed cartel cash disguised as consulting fees and community grants. A few still insisted they were framed, but the data trails showed no mercy. Messages, deposits, deleted logs, encrypted notes. For older Americans watching the evening news, the pain cut deeper than the crimes themselves. It was the sight of uniforms being carried out of precincts in evidence bags. It was the realization that the enemy hadn't just crossed the border, it had crossed into the ranks of those sworn to protect the country. Federal prosecutors moved fast. In just 6 days, a staggering 184 public sector defendants were taken into federal custody. District courts ground to a halt. 3 small-town police departments temporarily shut down for lack of untainted officers. Mayors called emergency town halls to calm communities reeling from the scale of betrayal. For years, the entire syndicate hid behind the polished image of a banker who preached integrity. People deposited their life savings into a system he quietly poisoned. Officers wore uniforms bought with bribes. Teachers guided children by day while secretly funneling recruits into the cartel by night. Families walked through churches, hospitals, and government offices, never realizing the people serving them answered to the organization. That was the true damage, not what La Furia Roa did in the dark, but what it accomplished in broad daylight. For years, the entire syndicate hid behind the gleaming facade of a banker who preached integrity. Citizens entrusted their life savings to a system he silently poisoned. Officers wore uniforms paid for with bribes. Teachers shaped young minds by day while quietly funneling recruits to the cartel by night. Families walked into churches, hospitals, and government offices, never suspecting the people serving them ultimately answered to the organization. That is the real damage, not what La Furia Roa did in the shadows, but what it pulled off in plain daylight. Operation Hawthorne teaches a brutal lesson: corruption doesn't always come from outside. It can grow from the very people we trust most. A polished banker like Daniel Hawthorne turned banks, police forces, and schools into tools for the La Furia Roa cartel, fueling thousands of crimes and hundreds of millions in dirty money. It's a wake-up call. Blind trust is dangerous. We must stay vigilant, question report suspicions, and stay involved. Only when citizens act can we stop the slow rot of trust and build a society strong enough to prevent this nightmare from ever happening again. From the Massachusetts drug scandal, we learned the profound lesson that blind trust in public institutions can lead to devastating consequences. Men like Lamar Cook, holding high office, exploited the system to traffic cocaine and fentanyl, turning state offices into criminal pipelines. It reminds every citizen that we must actively oversee, report suspicions, because corruption doesn't just come from the outside, it often takes root from within. Only through relentless investigation and collective accountability can we protect our communities, restore faith, and stop the darkness from spreading. Remember, silence is complicity with crime.